Okay. It is 7 o'clock. Welcome everybody to the October 26th, 2021 Planning Board meeting. We have all administrative business tonight. We don't have any projects or applications to consider, but we do have two very important administrative business items, which is a continued discussion of the Thoreau Depot Business District Draft Design Guidelines and zoning discussion, and preparation for a potential December 14th public forum, and the floor area ratio bylaw amendment discussion, continuing that as well. I am hopeful. We've had a lot of discussion primarily on the first one so far. Lots of important things to revisit though, but I'm hopeful we can sort of keep to a schedule of maybe an hour a piece of those two items, so that we can be fresh, in particular when we get to the floor area ratio discussion. This meeting is being recorded, and as we get to the end of each of the administrative business items, we'll take public comment. And if you are on online, please raise your hand. We'll call on you. And if you're on the phone, which nobody is here, but you press *9. Okay, so with that, let me first take a roll call of the board that's here. So I'll go down the list. First, Andrew.
Here.
Kristen.
Here.
Linda.
Here.
Kate.
Here.
Haley.
Here.
And Nathan.
Here.
Okay, and this is Burton Flint, and I am here as well. Okay. So prior to the meeting, in the last few days, we've received updated an updated Q&A and proposed zoning, or excuse me, an updated proposed zoning change for the Thoreau Business District that included a formula business bylaw or addition. And we've also received some comments, well, public comment, but also some proposed changes or things to revisit from Kate in both to the Q&A and as a sort of a summary of things that we should consider that was separately provided. So let me first ask, did everybody have a chance to see those materials? Okay, I'm seeing nods, thumbs up. Thank you. I think that it would be helpful, I think, to maybe first deal with the question as to whether it makes sense to include a formula business addition requirements to what we've been considering. And then maybe we will address specifically I'd like to go to Kate's comments, and we can go through those. And I think that will flesh out the issues we've been talking about to date. So did people, we briefly discussed the formula business district element last meeting. Seeing it on paper, getting a sense of maybe thinking about how many formula business districts there are today, whether that we think that's in scope of what we've been doing, whether it makes sense to do this all at once. Does anybody have any feedback or thoughts on that for Thoreau Business District? Andrew.
Every time I've had discussions about formula businesses in the past, people are surprised that it's not broader than it is, in the sense of it really only at this point applies to West Concord, and it seems appropriate to add it in other places if the part of the goal is preserving character, and that seems a big emphasis. Okay.
Though it is also Concord Center now. But yeah, you're correct. And I was thinking about that. Why is that? Why don't we have a town-wide? And I'm going to presume it was because the original formula business district in West Concord arose out of that planning process that was done in West Concord that was specific to that. And it's probably makes more sense when you're talking about putting a specific number on formula business districts, that you are looking at this limited area rather than town-wide and coming up with, say, a number of 50 formula businesses for the whole town. And those 50 could be concentrated in a center or something like that, which would not be the desired result. It also seems to me that the same considerations that have resulted in a formula business bylaw are present in the Thoreau Depot area as are in West Concord and certainly the town center. Let me ask if anybody on the board is opposed to the concept of formula business district bylaw for the Thoreau Street area.
Nope, I think
No,
it's a good
not
idea.
opposed. Yeah.
Okay, then question 2 is, do we think that that should be part of this overall rezoning, or should it be considered, or, I mean, we could potentially move it forward simultaneously at the town meeting but separately, or it could be part of what we're doing here since we are doing so many other changes to the Thoreau Business District.
I would, I don't know which order you just said that now, but I like the idea of running it separately, but simultaneously.
Okay. Does anybody else have a view?
I think it's worth also, proposing moving it on its own.
Mhm.
And that because I do think that all the zoning bylaws for the business district is just kind of a big, a big undertaking and understanding to happen.
Okay. Elizabeth, do you think there are any complications with doing it separately or advantages to doing it together or vice versa?
I don't think there's any issues doing it separately.
Mhm.
And I think there's advantages to, if the goal for the formula business for the Thoreau Depot Business District is that specific aspect, it is better not to include it in a much larger bylaw where, if something fails on its whole, but that's something that the
Right.
town can discuss separately.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we advance it at least simultaneously. Marcia, I see your hand raised. Do you want to weigh in?
Well, as the Director of Planning and Land Management and participating, I've provided staff support to the West Concord Task Force. And the formula business concept grew out of the master plan for that area. I think the effort that you're going to with the Thoreau Business District is comparable to a master plan. And so I think the formula business application would work really well as a separate entity and not as part of your rezoning for the Thoreau Business District.
Okay, so just be clear, you're suggesting advance it, but separately.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Because one of the things I was thinking about is if there is any redevelopment, as is oftentimes the case with redevelopments, space can sometimes go from Class B to Class A, and then you end up being more attractive to chains or formula businesses rather than others. So the time would be ripe to do it. So I think we've covered the bases on this discussion, unless anybody else has any other points. That this is something we should add to the extent we choose to advance an article for town meeting for rezoning the Thoreau Business District, that we should also advance a formula business bylaw. That the consensus, Kate? I see.
Yeah, so is part of that we're going to decide the total number of formula businesses that will be allowed? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, that would be part of the process, which is generally counting the number that are there today and adding a collar.
Got it.
And Elizabeth, you said you counted 9 off the top of your head, but we would get a definitive count.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So then with that, and thank you, Elizabeth, for putting that together for us for this meeting. With that, I think maybe we should move to, well, actually, let me pause and ask if there is, just since that's sort of now a discrete issue, if there's any public comment on the formula business concept for the Thoreau Business District. There will, of course, be further opportunity as we develop a proposed article for town meeting to comment on that. But if anybody should have any comments tonight, please raise your hand. Seeing none, what I'd like to do, Kate, would like to go through the feedback you've gotten, and which I appreciate. I think in many respects, it reflects some of the comments and concerns we've received from the public. And I think to the degree we're addressing your comments and getting to consensus or not on some of those comments, then that's also responsive to some of the public comment we've received. Would you like us to start discussion with the general action items or your comments to the Q&A?
Action items, please.
Okay. Elizabeth, would it be possible for you to pull those up? And I got to change my view. Okay. So your point is point one on the housing production plan. Thank you for going back to that. I think so much of our discussion has been around the Envision plan, which was followed the housing production plan. But do you want to address you've got, I think it was housing points A, B, and C, I think. So do you want to just run through those?
Yeah, let me think about how to do this. So I'm looking at this screen that we're all sharing. I wish I had a separate, printed this out. So we talk about housing a lot. It's one of the major goals of the long range plan. When I went back to the housing production plan, I started to really think about what diverse housing means. When we talk about smaller houses, townhouses, apartments, condos versus large single family homes, we've been sort of including that as part of diverse housing. And so thinking that that's a good thing. But going back to the housing production plan, the real emphasis is on low, moderate, and middle income units. So we've often discussed even affordable units. What does that really mean? Who is able to really afford those units? And I think I've really struggled with if the town has goals for different types of housing that can be accessible to different types of people. Wanting to understand what the costs and benefits are of doing that in different ways. So a lot of times when a project comes before us, we're not really able to do that. So with regard to the current project, if we are saying that we're doing this to advance the town's goals for diverse housing, I just wanted to really understand how much housing we're really getting in that low, moderate, and middle income space versus market rate. And the way I read the housing production plan, and this may have changed in the long range plan, which perhaps you just alluded to, Burton, but I didn't see really a marked need for market rate apartments, condos, et cetera. So I think I just wanted to take this opportunity to look at this rezoning, and if we're using this to advocate, to sort of selling this because it is going to offer more diverse housing, I'm just really wanting to understand how it does that, like how well it does that, I guess, versus other ways of meeting these same objectives.
Okay, thank you. Now I have some thoughts on that, but let me ask other members of the board. Does anybody else want to have thoughts or comments on that, or second Kate's? I think Kate, you're if I may say, how is what we are proposing for Thoreau Business District advancing the goal of creating low, moderate, and middle income units? Is that okay? Any other members of the board want to speak to that?
I agree that we should definitely look at making sure that that it meets kind of that purpose, as well as, you know, economic vitality and revitalizing that area and as well as kind of transit oriented development. So I do think that Thoreau Business District should be looked at through multiple lenses. But
Mhm.
when I think about the new housing there, the reason I think it's diverse is because I think it's going to be smaller. I think it's going to be 1 and 2 bedrooms, where we're certainly not seeing that in single family. I think it's going to diversify the housing stock that way. I think it's going to make it more accessible to people. I mean, is it ever going to be affordable? Only because, it's going to be a lower total. It's going to be small a affordable, not capital A affordable. But it is going to allow, there could be rental units and things like that. So I think that we are adding more diversity that we would not otherwise have in our housing stock, and we're doing it close to transit.
Okay. All right. Any other board members? And I have similar views. I think it's interesting. Maybe what it's happening is we're focusing on this as a mechanism for creating a more affordable housing. And I think it's part of the long range planning process. When I was listening in on that, and I was not a formal part of that process, but certainly the planning board at the time provided input, seemed to me a couple of things that struck me. Is the idea that there's the missing middle, that there are mechanisms in town to support low income or low housing there can be that is either has deed restrictions to make it affordable, or other types of subsidies that would make it affordable. But the middle is priced out, and there's also not housing that's appropriate for people who no longer have families living at home. Maybe they're a retired couple or an individual who are looking to stay in Concord, but they don't want to stay in a 4,000 square foot house or what have you, and they would like to downsize but stay in Concord. And I know of a recent example of talking with a good friend who's older parent has moved into one of the few apartments there in Thoreau Business District, and has really appreciated being able to, they no longer want to have a big house. They eat in the restaurant, and many of their meals in the restaurants there, and they're able to get on the train and go and participate in university classes and go to museums and things like that in the city. And I don't think obviously this proposal is reducing some of the requirements for affordable housing on a developer. I think that with respect to that missing middle and the people that would be looking to downsize, that some of the things we're doing here could incrementally help those goals in terms of creating those 1 and 2 bedroom type apartments, or housing that otherwise is easier to maintain as an individual who doesn't want to take care of a big house, namely multifamily housing, condominiums and apartments. Whether we're going about it the best way, I leave to the board to discuss. But I do think, Kate, that we are would be encouraging housing types of which are increasingly in demand in Concord, and which we've seen through a public forum process of the long range plan are desired and sought, specifically near this train station. Do you want to?
Can I respond to that?
Please.
And well, I see Marcia has lit up. So I've heard that message generically, that we need more of these type of housing, but when you look at the production plan, it's looking specifically at what's being built and the demand. We actually have quite a bit that's been built over the past 10 years of that type of housing. And going back to 2015 now, it looks like we're actually on target to meet that demand. So with regard to the housing production plan, it gets down to specifics. How much are we permitting, and where is the demand? And it doesn't look like there is demand for that. So maybe Marcia or Elizabeth can speak to, maybe that's outdated.
Wait, Kate, can you just say there is demand for what and there isn't demand for what, just to clarify kind of what you're referring to?
I guess these apartment type housing.
Okay, so you're saying we've met the demand for the multifamily units based on what we built?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure with that I was hearing that. Thank you.
I would like to offer that the 2015 plan is out of date. We are in the process of starting the update to the housing production plan. We were waiting for the new census information to come out. It won't be out until probably the spring of 2022, so that we could undertake a needs assessment. But as the NMI StarMet committee was looking at the needs for housing, they continued to focus on multifamily housing and the middle, and how we could provide all more levels for workforce housing. So I think there still is a need and a demand and a requirement that we provide this type of housing.
And one thing that's worth noting about that opportunity is the StarMet 2229 is that because it's potentially town owned or there's significant more town influence, it's easier for the town to make dictates about the housing mix that is there. Here, any mandates related to affordability outside of the ordinary would likely meet the same fate that did in the West Concord development, where it is qualified as a taking. So that would be a concern, in the sense that you're mandating affordability outside of the ordinary process. You know, that would just be a concern.
Andrew, I think you could, just want to clarify one thing. I think we might run into concerns about the viability of an affordability requirement. That argument about there being, that was raised, it was a taking, was specifically under the subdivision control law, in terms of whether we had the authority to do that here, there. I think this is a different process, and there's a lot more precedent for being able to put affordability requirements. I mean, you look at the city of Cambridge, some of their, I think they've got requirements as high as 20% and things like that. So I think that's a slightly different issue, but the point stands, which is, will you actually see the development of affordable units if it doesn't make a financial sense in terms of the additional things that somebody can build because they created affordable, right? And that we've had a lot of discussion around that through this process. And looking at the number, why haven't they been built as of yet in the Thoreau Business District? Why is there a concern, at least, that we wouldn't be meeting the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act? And what we've been advised by the MAPC is that when you're talking smaller buildings, those numbers just don't pencil out, that we've currently got in the Bible. But thank you, Marcia and Andrew, for those points. It's very helpful.
I had something to ask, but I'll wait and see if other members have something first.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a sort of a diverse range of viewpoints on the need for the type of housing this might generate. I would agree with you, Kate, that this is probably not the mechanism that's going to result in a large number of affordable units, but what it might provide, I believe, is more units that are going towards that missing middle. Marcia mentioned in the middle, and a housing type that's market, but that is increasingly in demand as I think that it came out of the long range planning process that the median age in Concord is I believe it's in the upper 60s now, and heading higher each year. And so people are looking to downsize into smaller places, but would love to stay in town.
And I just want to underscore that at market rate, like the workforce, according to the housing production plan, they can't afford market rate. I just want to make that clear. So I guess I don't know what the middle means, but so do you guys mind just scrolling down? I tried to be concise in my, so I just help myself here. Okay.
So you raised questions about, I think, are we working in concert with the committees that are responsible for housing, right? Is what we're doing, would that have their endorsement, right? And we've recently talked about what we need to have a liaison that's liaising with those committees. Linda, wait, am I remembering correctly? Linda, you've raised your hand to do that based
correct.
upon your prior experience. But I also think that they are, well, what we do, there's certainly lots of overlap in terms of these things. I think we're looking at something slightly different. A lot of the housing committees in town are looking at addressing that affordable housing. And what we're looking at is implementing a zoning bylaw, which can be leveraged to create affordable housing, but not directly creating it. But I do think that it would make a lot of sense to have input from the housing committees on what we're doing here, in particular because we're adjusting the affordability requirement. And they might have strong views one way or the other on that.
So what we're doing in part, and just to really say it is in part, we're creating housing for wealthy Concord people who have lived in large single family houses and they want to downsize and they want to stay in Concord. So we're building houses. We're developing Concord and increasing the built context of Concord to provide housing for those people.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think we are increasing the diversity close to transit so that we can preserve kind of the green space out of town. And it does offer options for downsizing for Concord residents, like you're saying. But I think the other part is, you know, haven't we always heard that single family zoning is very exclusionary and has been? I think Marcia was even going to kind of work with somebody to look at our bylaws to see if we had exclusionary bylaws. And so by offering more multifamily housing, I think we're trying to get away from what has been traditionally exclusionary zoning. So I think we should also think about it that way. Even though I hear what you're saying, it's not like these are going to be affordable for most people. They're still going to be, the market is still going to, there's still going to be a demand for them, and it will be what the market will bear.
Well,
So how is it inclusionary then? How is that, but like, how is that not exclusionary?
Well, it's more inclusionary than a single family, I think, is what Kate is, or what Kristen is saying.
I think what we're seeing as the model of development around town is as there are fewer and fewer single family lots to develop, the houses are that what is being built, the preponderance of houses being built are replacing smaller houses. And in doing that, but if the land acquisition includes a house, the house that gets sold necessarily has to be what we're seeing is in the $1.5 to $1.75 million range to cover that cost. I think that you can build condominiums and market them for significantly less than that. I've seen some shockingly high numbers for small flats recently just near my house, but they are smaller. And while yes, this may be as you're stating, well-to-do Concord citizens who would be going from large houses to smaller houses. The discussion is around the 2020 Envision plan was people who are in large houses who are now on fixed incomes. They are retired, and the large house is no longer affordable for them. Now we're talking about Concord affordable and the price of a large Concord house, but there were a lot of people in that planning process who felt that this was a necessary thing. I was surprised as coming into that planning process for the first time. It was my first long range plan in Concord that I participated in, and then I went to the first public session, and the prior plan had a great deal of focus on preserving green and open space. And it seemed to me, my observations were that people thought we'd done a good job there, and now we had to move on to focusing on housing and other things that would be important for an aging population in Concord. And that may be something that's not affordable in the sense that a young couple who are both starting out in jobs would be able to buy, but it would be something that somebody who could no longer afford to pay the property taxes on a large Concord home would allow them to stay in town. Elizabeth, you've got your hand raised.
So the proposed zoning that's been developed, there wouldn't be a standalone residential project. It would be part of a mixed-use development. And the current zoning has affordable requirements in there based on the number of units. The board could easily make those requirements more specific as far as whether it's, the first 10% has to be at 80% AMI, and then maybe 110% AMI. So you could be much more specific in the range of affordability that you're looking for, or it could be just all at 80% AMI. So, so there isn't, other than a project that's less than, less than 5, so 4 or fewer, which is already in the zoning bylaw, they don't need to have an affordable component. But 5 to 10, it currently says 10%. And for projects that are greater than 10 units, 20% must be affordable. So the board can define what that affordability is.
Okay. And so to the degree we just to be clear, we could have levels if you're coming in and you're on the hook for, let's just say 2 affordable units under the formula, we could say that the first is 80%, which is sort of what we consider as true affordable, and then the 120% is really sort of that missing middle affordable.
That's currently the provision, like it is currently in the PRD.
Right. In the PRD. So we could mimic that. We could copy that.
Or you could define it any way you like, but
Okay.
that is also a possibility.
Okay. So in other words, Kate, I think what we're doing, I'm glad you're raising this question in terms of is this, are we actually making a difference here? Is this window dressing for other changes? I think we're making a difference in terms of type of housing that the community has expressed a demand for. And like I said, there's 2 units that fit this category being built right next door to me, and I cannot believe the demand and the price that's it merits. But we could also implement this. If you feel like this is a question of what's truly affordable, what's the missing middle, what should be our target, we could modify this so that we're talking about 120% affordable, which is, for example, would work for maybe the families that we talk that come up in that planning process. One person's a teacher or one person's a nurse who work in town and are not able to afford to be in town.
Just a question I saw in Kate's point, I think C, other housing interest groups, have they weighed in on this?
Elizabeth, do you know if we've gotten any formal feedback? I don't recall, other than people who may have been on housing committees or groups speaking at a public forum. Do you know if we've reached out specifically to any of the housing committees for their feedback on the change around affordability?
There is a meeting coming up of all of the housing groups, and I think that would be an appropriate venue in which we should have this discussion. I think it's November 8th. And so they do that periodically. So I think that this would be the time to present it to those groups. So maybe we could have a joint meeting if a number of members wanted to come to that meeting.
Is that a public meeting? Do you know?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me just look. You said that was on November 8th?
Yes, it is, Burton. And I can relay the request to Liz Rust, who is the Executive Director of the Regional Housing Services Office, who is putting the agenda together for the housing groups. It's their quarterly housing roundtable, and I'm sure they would welcome the opportunity to provide comment to you.
Fantastic. Linda, great suggestion. Great point to raise, Kate, and I thank you for that input. Marcia, let's do that. I can make it to a meeting on the 8th. And I think because it will be a public hearing already, Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, we can show up. We don't need, do we need to advertise that as a planning board meeting if more than 2 of us attend?
If more than, so you have 7 members, so if more than 4 of you attend, you have
Okay.
a quorum.
I would
and-
suggest, okay. Let me do a quick poll of the board here. Do we want to make that a meeting and ask that we show up and it be a planning board meeting, or rather send 2 to 3 of us as representatives to get feedback? I would suggest the latter, or that we just send some representatives, and because, to get feedback, in part just because I know that people have a lot going on starting about now. So if that's okay, Linda, can I rope you into that?
Oh, yeah, I'm planning to attend.
Okay. Anybody else from the board would like to attend that?
I'd like to.
Okay. And I'll-
Linda, are you gazing at a, do you know what time it is? Are you looking at like a meeting notice in front?
No, I'm not,
Okay,
but I
sorry.
would assume it's 7 o'clock. Their meetings are usually at that time.
In
But
the evening? Okay.
it's in the evening, yeah.
Okay. So Elizabeth, or Marcia, would that be you that would reach out to them, or Elizabeth, can you do that on our behalf and ask if Kate and I and Linda can come and update them on the Thoreau Business District discussions?
Definitely.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Kate, do you want to move to commuter rail parking, or do you want to go through, you had a couple of other housing points?
Yeah, I would love to talk about, it sounds like 1, 2 is already covered. 1, 3, this is, it's perfect that Marcia is here, and it would be great if the next housing production plan could specify, like we want, we need 60 units of market rate. We need 10 units, and I have a feeling you're going to say like, that's just not the way it works. But it's so hard to, if they said, this is how we understand demand. This is the number we came up with. This is what we already have. This is the supply, so we already have. This is the Muse. This is, all these other big buildings that we already have in Concord. This is the, Brookside Square. Then it would be easier to understand it more as something that's really needed versus something that, like, when we were polling people, they said, oh, that would be good. I'm going to retire in 10 years. And I have this, this vague feeling like there's not going to be a house for me and I want there to be. And so what do you think about that?
In 2017, the RHSO put together an infographic that begins to answer some of those types of issues in terms of what people can afford, how many people are working in Concord that can't afford to live here because the price of housing is so high. It's challenging to know what we're going to need because we can't predict how housing will be developed over time. We've seen a number of properties where they tear down the house and then they subdivide the property and add more housing. Or we have an opportunity similar to Brookside, and that created a certain number of units. And then our housing number is constantly changing. Don't remember, numerator is the top and denominator is the bottom, I think. And that denominator stays the same with each 10-year census. So Our number will change with the 2020 census. We don't know what that number is yet because it has to be year-round housing, not seasonal housing. And they take out certain numbers. So we still don't know what our base number is, but we know that we will fall short because we haven't created enough affordable housing to keep us above that 10%. Once Junction Village begins construction, those numbers will count. There's 83 units there. We'll be fine probably till 2030. So we have protected the town from a hostile 40B or a comprehensive permit. We can still invite, we can have friendly 40Bs. We can work with developers where they have appropriate sites and where they want to put in a higher level of affordability. And that meets a variety of needs that we may or may not be aware of just yet. I think as we look at our numbers again, look at what the needs are in the community and the demographics, we will begin to say, okay, we need more cottage type housing, we need more multifamily housing. It would be great to have more housing close to transit areas, etc. So we can put rough numbers, but we can't put specific numbers because things keep changing and needs keep changing. And that's why it's updated every five to 6 years.
Yeah, and I think what would be, sorry, Linda, if it said like we need 2 market rate apartments and we need 50 affordable units, that would change the conversation a little bit. So Linda had her hand up. Thank you.
I was just going to say that there is additional complexity to those numbers, and that the threshold of 10% is what keeps us from having a hostile 40B. However, that doesn't say what the demand is, other than it's a artificial number that we at least want to make that target. The second issue is that a lot of things that qualify in the housing index number are not actual affordable units. That is, for example, Junction Village has 83 units, but only a minority percentage of those are actually going to be rented out based on affordability. There will be a number in there that will be market rate as well.
No, that's not true, Linda. They're all below market. They were all required to be below market because of the deed restriction on the land.
All right.
Some of them might be at 150% of the median, but they are not at market rate.
Not at market. Okay.
Right.
But in some of the other, is that the same with all the projects like the Muse and such?
The Muse, 25% are affordable, are considered affordable, are considered subsidized, but all of the units count toward our numbers. So that's the problem or the issue with 40B and rental projects. The entire project counts, but only 25% are truly affordable. And so that's why why we have an ongoing need for more lower and medium affordable housing.
All right. So sometimes it gets confusing, as I've just demonstrated.
Okay, thank you. That helps. If we can move on.
Yeah, I want to make sure we get to your other points
Yep.
as well. So let's talk about commuter rail parking. So obviously, if I can, the concern you have expressed previously is that there's currently this lot, it's 40% of the current commuter parking. The depictions we're showing that have been prepared as hypotheticals or visuals as part of the presentation show the physical space where those lots are, those leased parking spaces are today, replaced with a building. And so the obvious question is, well, what happens to the demand which existed prior to COVID for those commuter parking spaces? And I think 2 points, and Marcia, I may call on you here in terms of things that we could do. So first, I think if the Elizabeth, if the Crosby's lot was redeveloped, as the example, since that's where the commuter parking is today, what we are proposing is changing to the zoning that would allow by right them to, instead of building mixed use all in one building, allow them to build mixed use in multiple buildings on the same lot, and a few other tweaks that might make it more, incentivize them to utilize more of the lot. Could you describe the process around what a site plan review would be, and that would be by right, what a site plan review would be that might involve an opportunity to address the need for commuter parking or parking that's put aside for public use? And Marcia, if you might want to touch on, well, if you have any insights there as well, or things that you might suggest to make sure that parking was part of a proposal, I'd love those thoughts as well. So Elizabeth, site plan, and if you guys have suggestions to make sure that parking would be taken into consideration under what we're proposing for the zoning here.
Okay, so for site plan approval, if it was just a by right project and somebody was coming through with site plan approval to implement commuter parking. So first off, the graphics that we're using, one of the elements of this zoning is so that there isn't parking right up against the street. So while the graphic shows a building where there currently is commuter parking, it doesn't mean that there's going to be no commuter parking. So I think that becomes, if it's just straight site plan review, that just becomes a dialogue with that particular applicant, if how they're developing the site. The graphics that MAPC provided is just that, it's just a graphic. Somebody could develop it with a much larger building that faces the front with Crosby's right on Sudbury Road, and then only residential in the back. So it really is going to depend on how somebody envisions developing that, working with their site engineers and their architects and how they wish to go about that. So the graphic.
Pardon the interruption, but just procedurally for folks that it may not be crystal clear, and I'm going to put myself in that category. If you are not requiring parking relief because you meet the requirements of the zoning that we're proposing here, or you don't require another special permit or zoning relief, at what stage does that site plan review have, and what are the levers that the planning board have through the site plan review process to seek that a developer address commuter parking?
I don't think the hardcore mechanisms are in place through site plan review to require a private property owner to make concessions for a public purpose. I think if there are incentives that you can implement or put into the zoning, that if a private property owner through redevelopment wants to take advantage of that incentive, they then have to provide commuter parking. That's something that can be put into the zoning and becomes part of that dialogue. But for just straight site plan review, I don't believe that that's part of that process. Can
you refresh us on what was the original driver for the lease that was entered into back in the 1960s, or how that was part of the special permit for the Crosby's development?
So currently the zoning district, it's the Thoreau Depot Business District, and then a residential district. That property line, that zoning district does not follow the property line of the Crosby's lot, and it actually cuts across that front corner where there currently is a significant portion of the commuter parking. So the owner at that time wanted to extend parking into that residential zone district And as part of that special permit process, that offer of having commuter parking was part of that special permit.
Okay. Would it be possible if we made that section of the residential district part of the Thoreau Business District, that we concurrently put a requirement for around commuter parking into the zoning that would affect that, it would affect the Thoreau Business District? And maybe, Marcia or Elizabeth, if you could have it, I guess that's is part of the discussion with what specific mechanisms do you think would be workable to make sure that if the property is redeveloped, we would have a lever to create parking?
I think that's an interesting solution that you've just suggested, Burton. Because there was a special permit and because there was high interest in providing commuter parking spaces, the town actively was looking for parking spaces at the back in the 1980s. And I think that's how they negotiated this special permit for those 55 parking spaces. Since that time, we have entered into lease agreements so that we could raise funds to help pay for the plowing and maintenance of those spaces on behalf of the owner and Crosby's Market. And with COVID, of course, we haven't been able to collect much of anything, but it will probably, we're hopeful that things will change. I think as we're looking at future reuse, that it's reasonable to consider commuter parking as a component of this area, and what we might be able to offer owners as they choose to redevelop their properties. I think this area provides the largest site available for such parking. I don't know of any comparable lot in the Thoreau Business District that might be able to do that, other than maybe Concord Crossing, but that has already been oversubscribed with the businesses and residences that live that use those spaces.
So just to maybe flesh that out a little bit, were you saying sort of as part of this rezoning process, have some requirement around if the use is changed, or to utilize the zoning, you've got to provide commuter spaces, or sort of separately, so a little bit like we just talked about the Formula Business District, separately say, we'll move this line, but in return for moving the line, there'd be some, for example, deeded right to parking spaces. I don't know. These are new concepts to me, so
I think it's worth considering. I know that the spaces that are adjacent to the existing Thoreau Depot are part of a deed. When the MBTA sold the depot to a private enterprise, they required that a certain number of spaces remain as commuter spaces. And we might look at something similar with the current owner. Is there a way that we can permanently retain these 55 parking spaces if the town continues to do enforce some kind of parking fee for those spaces?
But likewise, perhaps give them flexibility on where those 55 spaces were located. Correct. So that you wouldn't have them fronting the road.
Correct. Perhaps in a better location and more convenient for commuters.
Right. Kate, these are broad brushstrokes, but the idea being, trying to make sure that there's some sort of not sort of hope for the best, but rather a mechanism to require the maintenance of commuter spots, whether or not in that particular location or somewhere else within that area, because as Marcia pointed out, that's really the only area that's the only lot for it. Would that assuage some of your concerns?
Yes.
Okay. I would be really grateful, Elizabeth and Marcia, not to put more on you, because I know that there's not a lot more of you to be, to spread around, but if we could come up with, some specific ideas, and maybe even approaching this, is it Stop and Shop, who's the current owner, or figuring out whether any of that would be realistic. I like the idea of, I think we've always been it's news to me that that residential property line actually cuts through the Crosby's lot. If we corrected that, because it really is truly part of our planning here, in return for making sure down the road that there was a real mechanism for ensuring that those spaces remained, that would be fantastic. And I think that's probably the biggest concern we've heard across this planning process.
All right, can I ask a question about this just to better understand the leasing arrangement? So is it regardless of owner? So if ownership of that property changes, are the new owners obligated to, if they change nothing else, are they obligated to engage the town for those 55, 56 spaces for leasing?
Yes,
So the example I was thinking of, say, an Amazon purchases that land, changes Crosby's to a Whole Foods, they are still obligated to work with the town to lease out those spaces.
yes.
Through 2024, right?
No, permanently, as long as the special permit is in place.
What?
The special permit allowed for the expansion of the shopping center. And not, it wasn't just the expansion of the parking lot, but expansion of the building. And so that's in the special permit and as long as that special permit is in place, those 55 parking spaces are to be used for commuters.
As long as the special permit's in place. So under Nate's scenario, if somebody else, a new owner comes in and demolishes the building and builds a new building, then the special permit's no longer in place, or it still is?
Well, correct. If they build
one?
something that is in conformance with zoning, then they do not need to provide the 55 commuter spaces. But if they were simply to flip the property to use it as it's being used to keep the buildings as they are, those 55 spaces would have to remain.
I see. Okay, so okay, thank you.
So what's the
But
function of
to throw
the
another thing in there, if they were to build it and still be a non-conforming build, they would still be obligated to maintain those leased spaces?
If they come in with a new proposal, but do not conform with the zoning, that would be part of the discussion, the negotiations. What are we getting for granting you this special permit? A special permit is not by right. It is at the discretion of the zoning board of appeals. So they can place conditions on the property and they could keep that condition in place. If it conforms with zoning, if the proposed use conforms with all the aspects of zoning for size and number of parking spaces and everything else, then conceivably those 55 spaces could be eliminated.
So what's the function of the license or the lease then? Is it just a revenue sharing issue?
Correct. It's a revenue sharing mechanism.
Okay, so the 2-3 year whatever thing is really just how the parties are allocating the money that comes in. It has nothing to do with the number of spaces that are effectively at this point owned by the town,
Correct.
or the town has a right to.
Correct.
Okay, it's kind of a different discussion then.
Great. Thanks, great.
Now,
Should we move on?
yeah, sure. And if I may, and Kate, feel free to tell me you think I'm providing this short shrift, but the discussion around the MBTA Communities Act, I saw your comments as this, you got your concerns here, your comments as they apply to our Q&A. I think that some of your points, if they can be summarized in a word, is that the concern about our ability to meet or not meet the MBTA Communities Act are speculative at this point in time, as to whether we currently meet it or whether this will allow us to meet it in the future. Is that fair that it's speculative?
Yeah, and some of my concern is that in our last public forum, Chris said to the folks that were participating, and I can't remember if it was in his presentation, it might have been just in the room that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
He said, like, you're gonna have to do this anyways because of the MBTA Communities Act. Like, doesn't it,
Mm-hmm.
don't, and I was, and I wasn't sure that was quite right, and I was worried that that might have dissuaded people from participating because they think that it's a foregone conclusion. That's kind of one of my concerns, is that understanding what our message is on that.
Yeah, and if I may, and because I want to make sure we get to a good discussion of the green zoning elements here, which you raised, and we didn't have the benefit of Haley's input on at their last meeting. Here's my view on the MBTA Communities Act. It is speculative right now because we don't have final guidance from the state. We initiated this process completely separate and with no consideration given to the MBTA Communities Act because it did not exist at the time we started this process. Part of my day job is revising press releases and marketing materials to make sure we don't get ahead of our skis. What I think I'd like to do is take a crack at the Q&A and change some of that language so that it doesn't. We're not making affirmative statements that this will meet our MBTA Communities Act requirements or not, but more change it to that there may be future requirements and that essentially this may or may not help us meet those, but that's to be determined. I think you raised some good points around that about whether this goes far enough or whether this is necessary in either direction. But if we can leave it at that and get onto the green zoning, are you okay with that for this evening?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. All right. So with respect
Burton, before you go off that,
okay.
I can tell you whether it's the current zoning that the board is discussing or whether it's something else. Currently, there is no by right zoning that somebody could, under the current zoning bylaw, where somebody could do a project and be at 15 units an acre. So it's how zoning gets developed. It's yes, that's something that will be further fleshed out when there's more guidance. But currently, the current zoning would not meet that requirement. You could not meet the requirement.
Fair enough. But I guess what we don't know is exactly what would be necessary, what changes we could make that would go far enough where they would say, all right, there's no hurdles, there's no de facto element that makes that you can't do this by right. I mean, we need a little bit more information, and we also I think need a little bit more information on what the impact of not meeting the Communities Act would be on Concord. And I think for purposes of the Q&A in for January and April of 2022, we may not have enough information to have definitive statements around this. I think, other than and perhaps that what you just said was that the current thorough business district zoning would not meet the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act. So on green zoning, Haley, we missed you at the last meeting. We wanted to, points were raised that we don't have, by a member of the public and echoed by Kate, we don't have specific requirements in any of what we've considered to date. We've been focused on form and use, but not requirements such as, you need to have electric vehicle charging, or you need to provide other elements that might be really worthwhile to consider now. Kate, you've got some specific things about getting input from the sustainability director, adding let's see, consulting with other town committees and the like. Are there any sort of high points you want to reach? Or Kate, if you've had the chance to, or excuse me, Haley, if you've had the chance to consider this, suggestions you might have, or anybody else in the committee for that matter.
Go for it, Kate, if you want, or.
Well, I mean, for the first suggestion, I think somebody just needs to put some time into this, into looking back at our sources at our green zoning resources and say, what is green zoning? How does it apply here? Have we already applied it here? I mean, one thing that comes to mind kind of easily is low impact development. I think through some of our design guidelines, we have incorporated that a little bit. But otherwise, I think this just needs some labor to go back. So that's 4.1. And then 4.2 is kind of like putting this out there and seeing what we can catch in our net for other resources out in town.
Mhm.
Kate, I think that's what Gary was saying and Alice when they came to meet us originally, is that the kind of the first thing we should do is define, you know, what our goal was. Is it net zero? Is it, you know, LID? What do we mean by green, or try to put something around that? And I don't think we have kind of picked that up yet. And that was kind of in general, that wasn't necessarily specific to this business district.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got our new director of sustainability here, which is great. Her plate is going to be very full, but we've been having a side email with her, and she responded today actually, related to, you know, us saying we wanted to talk with her about green zoning generally, and she said, "Oh, you've got this great resource, MAPC." So, you know, and I made this point in my email, they do exist there at MAPC. I don't know where they are, but they certainly have expertise internally there. I would just, I guess, think that if you know, some of the grant money is going towards paying them, hopefully somebody internally there can review in the context of, you know, climate change and sustainability. But if not, you know, now we do have our director of sustainability, who I think will be happy to provide, you know, maybe more specific feedback. But yeah, you know, again, my take on this, especially after talking a few times with Northampton's planning director, and his view on, like, and I think I've shared this before, it's like, we all know now we can't require anything, you know, we can't require all electric, but there are a lot of things that we can actually require. So we should be doing that to the extent possible, and, you know, being very unambiguous with what we want to see in writing, and developers can come and say, hey, we want a variance from this or that, and we can't do this or that, and like, but make them walk it back. Don't put ourselves in the position of, you know, not being strong enough in the requirements, and then, you know, we find ourselves, you know, trying to get ourselves out of a bad situation with a development that we don't like because we didn't set the guidelines clear enough. You know, require low impact development. Like, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, Haley, I think I strongly agree with you. I don't want to be in the position where somebody comes in and says, oh, well, we put in Energy Star dishwashers, so we've met your requirements. I think that we do need to be concrete, provide actionable items for developers. I would love to get input from the sustainability director. One thing that I would like to focus on is, you know, we're talking about transit-oriented development. What are things that could be green zoning that are complementary or synergistic with transit-oriented development? So maybe that is, I mean, small but simple things like requiring bicycle parking facilities. I would want to see, you know, I think requiring, anytime you have multifamily housing, you know, these could be great opportunities for pilot projects that I know that the electric light plant is looking to implement around electric vehicle charging, which is something that's extraordinarily hard to do if you don't do it upfront with multifamily. So I would like to see a requirement there. I know we did have one person who a member of the public who made comments previously about concerns around, unless I'm crossing a wire, the retention basins and things like that for water runoff and tree plantings. You know, I think we've got a lot more compared to when this was probably developed, a lot more around that and recharge and things like that. But that would be something to focus on. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I would like to see, in particular, green zoning that is complementary to the idea of transit-oriented development. I guess, where can we take this from here? The sustainability director has started, right? She's on the clock. Elizabeth, well, and then there's other town committees, right? There is the Elizabeth, help me out. Which is the committee?
There's the Comprehensive Sustainable Energy Committee that does kind of that town education, and then there's the Climate Action Advisory Board, maybe CAB.
Okay.
CAB, I think, is like, does the policy recommendations, and CSEC is kind of the consumer education, it seems like.
Yeah, so maybe it's the Climate Action Advisory Board that could be advising us on on actionable items here, along with the sustainability director. Elizabeth,
No. No, so I've been out of the office, so I do have an email into her to meet with her and go over this and go over quite a few things to get on her plate. But this will definitely be the priority, to meet with her and have a conversation with her about this. But what I was also looking at is this was something that the board discussed previously, as far as the floor area ratio, and having that, I'm going to say the regular build FAR, but then have this sustainable build FAR. And the question went out to town council, because Andrew raised the questions on how it fits in with the zoning act. So town council did get back, and what is interesting is that Lexington did put forth basically a green zoning initiative, but it was for the commercial buildings, and their incentive was in height, not necessarily floor area ratio, but height. So if a commercial developer provided, these different things as far as a sustainable design, then the developer was allowed to go higher in the development and have more stories. So it was basically buildings which are not designed to meet the requirements to demonstrate certification at the silver level using LEED version 4 for building design and construction, as outlined in the United States Green Building Council, are limited to 65 feet in height. And buildings utilizing on-site combustion for HVAC system operations are limited to 6 stories. So they have put in different components, and that this was approved by the Attorney General without comment.
Okay, so that's an incentive. What about a baseline that would say, for example, if we changed it to say, if the X number of parking spaces are required per unit of housing, or X number of spaces would be required for based upon the commercial use, and 50% of those need to have infrastructure for level 2 charging. I mean, can we just say that as a baseline? And then to the degree somebody can't do that, then they're coming to us and having that discussion. But rather than starting out with it as just only getting that if we're giving something additional.
So
I'm wondering if the building, yeah.
Yep. So the last sentence is, town council did some research prior to town meeting about the question of whether this is permissible, and concluded it was. However, the key point to keep in mind is that the incentive must be reasonable. The town cannot, for instance, require a floor area ratio that's not reasonable builder or homeowner could live with unless there's an EV charging station. So it's, speaking of the floor area ratio, you couldn't have a floor area ratio that was, your standard, and it was so high that somebody could only build, a 500 square foot home, unless they did these incentives. So I think that's where the balance would be. Is when does it become not an incentive if if somebody doesn't want to do any of that, but the standard zoning doesn't leave them with the ability to do anything, then I think that is something that would not pass the Attorney General.
So,
But I mean, the current FAR is not restrictive at all.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Solely speaking of the FAR, even if the board went and reduced the current floor area ratio and had your standard FAR, even if you reduced it, that's still reasonable. Somebody still can build, a reasonable dwelling. It might not be, an 11,000 square foot home on a 6 acre, piece of property, but for all the smaller ones, that's still reasonable. Nobody's going to say that, having a 3,000 square foot home is not reasonable if you're on a 10,000 square foot lot.
so,
But if you had the sustainable FAR that said you could go higher if you did these, I don't think there would be any issue with that. I think it would pass the Attorney General. Speaking to the Thoreau Depot business zoning, I think you, as Burton said, thinking about what would be the incentives to this type of mixed-use development, transit-oriented development near a commuter rail station. What are the incentives to a builder to implement sustainable and green zoning, so that they want to do that for their project to get those incentives? But if they didn't want to do those incentives, they would still be able to, reasonably build something. And I think it's finding that balance.
So I just want to clear, maybe at the risk of asking a stupid question and revealing the depths of my ignorance. Well, we can dictate that they provide X number of parking spaces per residential unit, for example. Can we not dictate that they provide X number of parking spaces and the associated infrastructure necessary for charging per unit?
That I'm not sure.
Okay.
If it's just a flat out requirement under the zoning and it's not tied to some type of incentive, that I don't know.
I mean, we're looking at, I don't know what Massachusetts has required, but we're looking at some states. California, I believe, has now set or Washington or Oregon has now set a deadline of like 2040 for the cessation of sale of gasoline powered vehicles. So within 20 years, all of these, any multifamily housing here will need electric vehicle charging for some portion up to all of its residents. It seems like, as a planning board, requiring that the construction has that infrastructure to meet those requirements is within our purview and is not overreach. I'd be curious if we can't just start saying, as of now, that parking, to the extent parking needs to be provided, it needs to be provided in a manner that will be how people will need to park their cars, which is park and plug in. So I think for the Thoreau Depot business zoning, it comes down to two different aspects of that zoning. One, it's a commercial zone district, right?
So any project will have to go through site plan review, and the board has the sustainability criteria. And I think that's where, during those conversations and those discussions, you get EV charging stations in the parking lot for patrons.
Right.
I think it's a slightly different conversation, and I'm thinking the ability to include those requirements for EV charging when you're talking about the combined business residence project, because it's
That's where I'd be worried about it.
putting
Exactly.
that requirement in for a combined business residence project, and making that a requirement for that type of project doesn't eliminate the property owner's ability to just build a commercial development.
Right.
If they
Right.
didn't want to do EV charging stations for residents. So I think that's the finer question that I would, I'll bring back to town council.
That's a great insight. And I mean, that's exactly what I would be worried about. Businesses can build it if they want to incentivize, provide something to attract customers. That's one thing, but a resident needs it. So if we could say you get to build combined, if the residential portion, you need to have charging infrastructure in the required residential parking spaces, that would be, I think, that would show some foresight. That's one piece of it, though. So just to close, just to bring us with an action item to go forward, I think we need the input from the sustainability director. It would be great to have the sustainability director attend our next meeting, if that would be a possibility, to get input. And in advance of that, maybe reach out to her and get her thoughts that could be shared with the board to consider going in advance. Any other comments?
You're not going to be here at the next meeting if you wanted to participate.
Yeah, I maybe I'll be jumping back and forth because I do have, I'm at another meeting. But maybe I'll jump back and forth. Nathan, you'll solve all the green zoning stuff for us at the next meeting. Okay.
And I think I think it'll be good discussion. I mean, obviously Massachusetts has to be, we're in the forefront for this. I mean, at a state level, there's some, significant requirements, but the electric vehicle charging infrastructure does come with costs that, more sustainable building material and building all electric doesn't necessarily impose additional costs. That being said, it can also be a revenue generator, and there's certainly significant incentives, I think, available. So, I think that having kind of information like that, like a cost benefit thing, and maybe the sustainability director will be able to provide. I just think it's worth kind of possibly keeping those things separate: electric vehicle supply equipment and other parts of green zoning.
It's a good point. Though I will tell you that another piece of that coin is if you require it up front, the cost is a time, because
You are absolutely right.
Being directly involved right now in doing all the sub metering and bringing in the additional line for electrical vehicle charging for a 10-unit garage. Instead of the, I don't know, $5,000 up front, it's more like $50,000 or $60,000.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. But so I don't know. I just feel like as a state, we know where we're going. So I would have to believe that all levels of government would kind of support us on this. We just have to find the right way to present it.
Right. Okay. Any other final comments on the green zoning piece? Then what I'd like to do is get public comment on this, and as quickly as possible move to the FAR discussion if we're ready for that. So board members, final thoughts. We've got Kate's comments on the facts. Do we want to go through those tonight, or can we move on to FAR? And Kate, you're good with FAR? Okay.
I just wanted to say thanks, Kate, for putting this together. I think the discussion was really good as a result of kind of all of these starting points. So thank you.
Yeah, it's very valuable.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
I second that. Okay. Any members of the public have further comments or observations? If you do, please raise your hand. And the first hand I see raised is Carol Savoy. Carol, if you want to have the floor. And first, your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. I wanted to kind of make 2 points. One, in the past, we've discussed the number of units being built And folks on the board asked me where I got those numbers. I did go back and look at some documents online. The April 13th, 2021 zoning meeting on pages 7 and 8 and 9, I believe. They point out that Crosby's has 63 units, which we talked about, and that Thoreau actually has 29 units. Originally, I thought it was 10 to 15, but the hypothetical build out in that is 29 units. So it's double what I thought. So I made a mistake. So I just wanted to, clarify that for everybody. And then I was just trying to, we're back to the parking. And, if it's, one parking spot per unit at 29 units, I was just trying to understand where 29 parking spots are going to be on Thoreau Street for those new units. And right now it's 2 times 29. So it's, that's what the zoning is today. And I just don't understand where they're going to be. Have in the hypothetical build out, has the board looked at that?
I think the hypothetical, Elizabeth, is a hypothetical build out based upon massing of the buildings. You're on mute, Elizabeth.
I think it was based on it would setbacks and height and of buildings, and whether it was 3 stories and the size of a building. So I don't think it takes into consideration from that point all of the design guidelines that have been developed, and the board's discussion on height at 35, the current 35 feet instead of 38 feet. So I can go back and get clarification on the parameters that were used for those hypotheticals.
I think perhaps just the point would be, the response would be, it may not be possible to get a hypothetical 29 parking spaces as well as maximize the density of the build out to allow for the need for 29 spaces. But that would ultimately be, short of having, parking spaces with elevators built into, under the buildings. And that would be for a developer to consider the cost benefit analysis of that. If there is space for 29 spaces and they can build those, then there would be room for 29 spaces. It's sort of like question answers itself. But Carol, I think you had another point as well, please.
Yeah, I just noticed there was a new document on the website, 35 feet versus 38 feet, flat roof versus pitched roof, and shows some diagrams of that. I thought there was a third option we talked about, or I asked if it was feasible last week, which was, can you have a 35-foot pitched roof? And
yes, you could build that. You could build that today.
Right. And I was wondering, it just seems like that option was left out. It was either get 38 feet with, flat or or pitched, but there was no 35-foot pitched. So I thought we should make that people aware that they could keep it at 35 with a pitched roof.
So you think people might think you can only build a flat roof in the district today?
I think, look, yes, I think they think if you want if you keep it at 35 feet, you can't have a pitched roof. You can only have a pitched roof with a 38-foot roof. That's what is kind of represented out there today in the new diagram that's out there. And there's
so the diagram was for the board's discussion from the last meeting, where they were talking about the 35 foot to 30, or whether to allow 38 feet as an incentive. And the diagram was provided to show this is a 35-foot flat roof. If 38 feet was an incentive, only do a 38-foot incentive roof if it was pitched, and not allow it as a flat roof. So currently the zoning bylaw is 35 feet. And for the commercial projects, it's not to the ridge, it's to the midpoint. So, you could have a pitched roof And how the height gets measured for commercial projects currently is slightly different. So it's not a to the ridge like it is for residential projects.
So if I'm correct, that means you could build today a 38-foot house with a pitched roof in that district if the midpoint of the ridge was 35 feet?
Not a house, no,
Oh,
a commercial
okay.
building.
A commercial building?
Yeah, and 611. So okay. The height of a building shall be measured as the vertical distance from the mean ground level of each side of the building to either the highest point of the exterior in the case of a flat roof, or to the mean average finish grade between the plate and the ridge in the case of a pitched roof. Chimney, spires, towers, elevator projections, they don't get taken into
Wait,
consideration.
the mean, sorry, say that, the mean average distance between the plate, is that, the plate is what element of the building?
The plate would be, so the roof and then the plate is at the bottom, basically the
Okay.
bottom of your
The
E.
soffit somewhere, yeah, okay.
Correct,
And the ridge line.
correct.
Okay, so I got to ask the question, and so you would suggest that we could, under today's zoning, for commercial at least, you could build either of those buildings that were depicted in the diagram that was put up there today. Assuming that mean on the pitched roof one was 35 feet or less, which I would assume it is, since it's a 38-foot building.
Well, it's on each side of the building. So the height of the building shall be measured as the vertical distance from the mean ground level of each side of the building. I think for the Throw business, for the Throw Depot business districts, most every single lot is, flat. So I don't think there would be a difference in the mean
Okay.
ground level on a side. And then, yes, then to the mean average finish grade between the plate and the ridge in the case of a pitched roof. So, I mean, you would go around and do the calculation on each side of the building.
So if we did not change that and we kept the measurement the same, don't we get where we've been talking about wanting to get?
I would have to sit down with the building commissioner and I can look at that diagram, but that's only one side of the building.
Okay, I mean, it's just curious because to me, it sounds like we've been talking about increase. I thought we'd been talking about going from 35 to 38 to allow 2 full residential floors above a commercial floor, and the commercial floor might have a 12-foot ceiling, right? So
Right.
you get up there. It would appear that if I'm hearing you correctly, assuming we go along with the pitched roof as a design requirement, that you could build a pitched roof with dormers and the like to get that 3rd floor, where the top of the pitch would be, assuming it's been a long time since I took geometry, but assuming a 45-degree roof, the top of the pitch could be 40 feet if the soffits are at 30 feet today under the zoning. Assuming a flat lot, a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, so a lot of assumptions that I'm not going to answer on the fly in a Zoom meeting, no.
Fair enough. I
Well,
respect
but
that.
is your point, Burton, do we need to change the height if it's not
If we
gaining
can do
us more?
38 today. Yeah, I guess I want to poke at that a little bit. I think we started at this discussion talking about going to 38 feet flat. We've now talked about wanting, because of the design guidelines, we're talking about pitched roofs. And maybe we're potentially back to 38 feet. I want to at least explore that. It would explain why there's buildings there today, which I'm convinced are over. I mean, maybe they're grandfathered in, but they're over 35 feet, but they have pitched roofs. So that would explain that potentially.
May I ask a question? For each of
course,
these
yeah.
examples, it would be so great to say a 35 pitch roof, like this building in downtown Concord, or 38 flat, which would look
Yeah.
like this other building. Is there any way, Elizabeth, can we do that? Like, based on, does the town have that information, like how high some of these other buildings are? Because it'd be so great to give people examples.
Only very recently constructed buildings would we have that. If there were plans in the building department that have been recently approved for let's say just, like downtown Concord, or, I don't even think we have elevation plans for the actual Thoreau Depot. So I think the only way and I don't even know if you can measure something that accurate to a foot or a couple of feet on, like on Google Street View, or even we have other mapping that we use, near maps. I don't think it could ever let you get that specific to say that this was 35 or 38. So yeah, I'd have to look into whether the mapping software we have would even be that specific.
But you think for a new building, we would have that?
Oh, for newer buildings, yes.
Yeah.
We would be able to.
Maybe I'll make a trip down to the building department. They love me there.
But we don't have any, like on Thoreau Street right now, we don't have any second floor buildings, do we, besides the depot?
Well, there's a couple converted houses that have commercial businesses in them. I'm thinking of at least a real estate office. Is there there's some sort of wellness offices?
Okay, certainly nothing like more than 2 floors, I don't think, though, right?
No, but we should probably have the they won't be to Kate's point, those plans won't be in the building department. All those big rolled plans have been shipped off site. So it takes a couple of days to get those, but I imagine we definitely have the plans for like Concord Crossing, and at least get, that's one visual everybody can see. And so I can get those plans from storage and talk to the building commissioner about that as it relates to, how it's defined in zoning, because how height gets defined has been changed. Not since I've been back, Marcia might know, but it's been changed a few times over the past few years.
And to make sure I'm thinking of this correctly, when we're talking about a pitched roof, are we proposing that you could have a mansard style roof that would, well, in measuring a mansard style roof, assuming it's got an actual flat roof on the top instead of sort of that little hump that a lot of mansard houses have, for that style roof, are you measuring halfway up the mansard, or are you measuring it as a flat roof?
I don't measure it, so that would be a conversation I'd have to have with the building commissioner.
Okay, but that may be an impact here when we're talking about 35 versus 38 feet. If we're talking about a larger multifamily, let's say in the Thoreau or in the Crosby lot, let's say you're building a large apartment building with a grocery store on the ground floor, that's much more likely to have a mansard style roof, because it would be too expansive to have a true pitched roof. And then that may be where the 38 feet would really come into play. Okay, so that's something to think about. That's not settled. Do any other members of the public have any comments or questions they'd like to bring forth on the Thoreau Business District zoning? Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Carol, for your comments. And I just also want to take a point to note that we do get all of the letters that are circulated and comments that are provided. And they're posted onto we've got a new section of the planning board website where those things are getting posted, and they are also circulated as they're received to the board or relatively shortly thereafter. So thank you for those, and keep them coming. With this,
I think there's another
I
hand
do
just
see a
went
hand.
up.
Mr. Stein.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, if you could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure, Joe Stein, 21 Thoreau Street. I just had a really quick question. so I sent a letter, there's no need to rehash that, but what is the legal minimum height for commercial ceiling? Is it 12 feet or can we get down to 10 feet? Did you guys know that or?
Elizabeth, that's, I think, a question for the building commissioner.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, that's purely a zoning, I mean, a building code issue, and it, I don't know enough to answer that, but I'm gonna hazard a guess that it may also deal with what the use code for that space is. So, you know, a barber shop may be different than if it's something that has, you know, hazardous materials or so that's purely defined in the building code. So that's not a question I can answer.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yep.
All right. Let's move to the floor area.
You have one more hand raised.
Oh, I do? Okay. Yes, Mr. Treitman, if I've pronounced it correctly. Yes.
Yeah, it's Bob Treitman. Regarding
If you could just state your address for the record, please.
43 Middle Street.
Thank you.
Regarding the building height and the examples, I'm wondering about the buildings that went up opposite the Unitarian Church on Great Road in Bedford. There was that mixed use development that went up in the last couple of years. And I'm wondering what the height, if there's any way of finding out what the height of those are, because that's sort of the idea of what might go on Thoreau Street.
Yeah, that's a great point. It was actually the first thing that my mind went to as well, because we specifically have used those buildings in some of our examples of what these changes in zoning could result in terms of having buildings of a new sort of New England traditional town center character with a parking in the back. So I'm wondering, Elizabeth, if Chris at MAPC might know, since that's sort of one of the models we've looked at. Maybe. Yeah.
I'll ask the town of Bedford before I ask him, but
Okay. All right.
I'll ask them both.
Yeah. I mean, those were built probably 6-7 years ago. And so they may be fresh. And I'm sure there was a lot of attention given that they are on the town green. But thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Treitman. Okay, gone on this discussion, moving to the floor area ratio discussion. We don't have sort of a specific proposal to look at. I think we want to advance that and talk about, focus on incentives and defining what it means to build green. Haley or Kate, do you want to lead us off here, or how would you like to proceed?
I would love to finish the conversation about the incentives.
Okay.
Elizabeth, to the question of council's response on our incentives allowed under section 3. And you said it depends on if it's reasonable. Was there any, like, where did that come from? Was there some case law that had distinguished between different projects based on reasonable or not? Or was it an attorney general had made a decision based on whether something was reasonable or not? Or I was just wondering, or who knows?
He did not say,
Okay.
but I think it's, all he says, you know, they did some research prior to town meeting about the question of whether this was permissible and concluded it was. However, the key point to keep in mind is that the incentive must be reasonable. The town cannot, for instance, require an FAR that no reasonable builder or homeowner could live with unless there was, like an EV charging station. So he didn't provide whether there was case law or where they came up with that opinion.
Okay. And then there was somewhat of a separate question on how an incentive would work under the statutory framework for energy delivery in the state. So that would go to whether we could provide an incentive based on fossil fuel free construction or no hookup Was there a separate answer to that question?
So no, that was all part of their example was using Lexington's, their requirements targeting commercial buildings and the incentives with height. But, you know, it's the same premise. You know, you incentivize somebody and, you know, include in that language that, you know, if you do this, you know, you get that. So I think you know, if you have just the regular floor area ratio and it's reasonable, which it is, I mean, you've started this discussion about lowering it because the current FAR isn't really doing a lot in most cases in the C and B zone district, or, you know, for smaller, you know, in non-conforming neighborhoods. So you started having that conversation about lowering the FAR to have it, you know, do what you intended it to do. And so it's still reasonable. So even if you were to lower the FAR, but then have this incentive for you can stay at the current FAR if you you know, are fossil fuel free, or have EV charging and be, you know, solar ready. And so I think the premise is the same.
I'm not sure if it is. I think the gas companies are protected in a different way under the
But it's not a requirement.
But it's not a
optional.
requirement.
Yeah, but I know, but I think there's an important distinction there. But I wish
Northampton is doing this, so I mean, there's precedent. It's an incentive. It's optional.
and
They're
they're
not
doing
protected.
that. They
They're not protected. When we're not making anybody do anything.
I think what Elizabeth is trying to say is that we have to offer a carrot, and a carrot is not the absence of the stick. Do you know what I mean? That it's you're not creating rules that are so punitive that the only way you get the carrot of the situation is to adhere to it. So you're not setting a cap of 1,000 square feet, no matter how big the lot is. But if you do this correctly, then you can have the current FAR. You know, there's a way to massage it a little bit more. So lowering the FAR because it isn't having the appropriate effect on mansionization, but allowing a little bit larger if there's other competing factors, such as, you know, that it's greener in the sense that it's providing what you want for other reasons, then it might be acceptable. It couldn't be anything drastic though, from the sounds of it. It couldn't be, you know, you can have a 4,000 square foot house if it's green versus a 3,000 square foot house if it's not, because that's too far. But it, you know, a couple hundred square feet might be possible.
Well, that's interesting, because I wouldn't have thought that was too far. I mean, I agree with what you were saying.
Well, I'm just saying that it's
right.
25% more than what you're allowed to do. So I don't know.
I was thinking as long as the minimum was in a reasonable space to live in, and I'm not sure who makes that decision, because to me, 2,000 feet is 100% reasonable for a living space.
But is it for a 2-acre lot? That's what I don't know.
Of course it is, because it's the dwelling. But so yes, that's for discussion. But I think the other part that we need to remember is when we are promoting the sustainable agenda of you know, what the town voted for and what we're trying to work towards, we're not punishing builders. We've seen research that says, you know, building all electric is on par, you know, as a financial investment, and most definitely it is not going to impact market demand for these homes. And so, you know, I just want us to be careful with saying, you know, we can't make it too restrictive for the builders, or what, or they're not going to build. I mean, we know that's not going to happen. So
no, Kristen, I don't think the conversation is that you're making it more restrictive for the builders. I think the conversation is, are you going beyond what the zoning act allows you to do? And, will the Attorney General certify, even if town meeting passes it, will they certify or will they disapprove it? So I don't think it has anything to do with whether you're not, making this good for our builders. I think is under zoning, there is this reasonableness test that you have to insert into the conversation for every zoning bylaw. And so you can't have a zoning bylaw where you have the standard one and you have an incentive, but the standard is it's so restrictive that nobody can can really do it. So you're basically making them do this incentive zoning.
Right. Oh, and I understand that. I guess it's who defines what reasonable is.
Yeah, that's my question as well. Like what would define that spread?
Well,
For
so I
Concord
don't think you even have to, I don't think you have to go there. You already had significant conversation before sustainability entered into the discussion with the floor area ratio about reducing the floor area ratio because it's not having this impact that, you've had it for, quite a few years. Kate's did, the whole spreadsheet. It's really not having this significant impact on mansionization, which was the intended purpose. The intended purpose, was all those years ago when this conversation started was not sustainability and fossil, fuel-free development. So you already had the conversation that lowering the FAR is a reasonable zoning bylaw amendment for the purpose it was initially intended for, and that was reducing the size of these dwellings and the whole mansionization and complete build out from setback to setback and to height, and that was the original purpose. So you could go forward and just lower the FAR and more than likely it would pass, and more than likely the Attorney General would approve it because you're not lowering it to the point where somebody has a 2-acre lot and you're only saying you can have 1,000 square foot home. The floor area ratio has that reasonableness into it based on the square footage of somebody's lot. And so you have a larger lot, you can have a slightly larger house. If you have a smaller lot, the purpose is to reduce the size, bulk, and scale, of these structures. So you could do that without even entering into the whole sustainable incentive FAR. So I don't think you need to have the discussion about the square footage between the two.
Yeah, I guess so. To build out kind of why I was thinking of it that way is because I want to be able to do both. So I'll start with what I don't want to see. So I don't want us to have the floor area ratio discussion, say, okay, this seems like a reasonable point to get to, and then say at some either along with this or sometime in the future say, okay, for if you build with no fossil fuels or EV charging or solar or whatever, you can go up to some other number, potentially up to the current floor area ratio. Because what I don't want to see is builders just be like, okay, and so you address one thing without addressing the mansionization. So I want us to be able to still address mansionization, but also incentivize getting more green building into the development. So my question still is, okay, let's get down to a floor area ratio we want to be at that is the incentive level, which addresses the mansionization, and then go down further from there to a point that is sort of the new standard that we can build to. And I want to know kind of what that gap could possibly be and still be reasonable. To Kristen's point, like, a 2,000 square foot home is still a pretty decent size, regardless of the lot that it's on. But is that too low relative to whatever we set the incentivized floor area ratio to? I don't know. So
I think it's hard to have this discussion in the abstract. I think if we start looking at numbers, it might make more sense to start having a discussion on, whether it's reasonable or not.
Yeah, Kate, I think that's a great idea. And we had those housing numbers that came back that said, I think, Andrew, you dug into this, how many houses were actually impacted by the floor area ratio, or how many would have been impacted, right? And it was a very small number.
It was a very small number. And what the real issue is with the, the current FAR standards, by the time you're at a half an acre of land, you're talking about a 6,000 square foot house. It loses sort of all semblance of.
Using those numbers that you looked at, is it possible to suss out where you start seeing those inflection points where the FAR would have an impact? So let's say for that half acre house, we started talking about 4,000 feet, just throwing out a number.
Let me see what I've got, what I did. I pulled a bunch of numbers and I played with them.
If I can summarize, I mean, I think that the general idea is the current FAR was a first good step. It's not really having an impact. We'd like to tighten it. Nathan, I think you put it well. We'd like to tighten it so that it actually does start to have an impact on mansionization, and that becomes your baseline. But to get to the baseline should require an incentive that is based upon our green zoning policy goals. So if we look at the houses that were built, let's say in the last few years, and we find out that, I mean, I know Matt Johnson did a tremendous amount of number crunching on this, Elizabeth, where he came up with a number that I think we thought was reasonable, and it would be interesting to have him come back and say, well, was this a baby step? Did you think we should always be ratcheting this down somewhat? But it would be.
I mean, that was certainly my impression of his numbers, was he didn't want to just completely, chop it off. I think he wanted to iterate and see, does this make a difference?
Right.
Yeah, and
I think it's going too much. Sorry, Kate, you know more.
No, go ahead, Chris.
No, I think he was kind of looking at what was currently being built. And I think we should be looking at what should be being built as part of kind of a sustainable housing.
Yeah, what he did was just look at what he wanted to, like, what the worst houses were and getting rid of those. That was his approach, which I think was a really good approach. But it was at the margins. And I think, I guess I worry if it's going to start having a profound economic impact on people that it won't get passed.
Well, that's why you go, if anything, it makes sense to go incrementally, because it definitely will have a real impact, and people will have to ask themselves, do I care about the character of the town, or do I care about the resale value of my lot and house? And there will be a balance.
Impact, what do we mean by that?
Because right today, if I have a 5,000 square foot lot, and I can build a what is this showing us, a 2,400 square foot house on it, and we change that to 2,000, that's that's how many, what are properties selling for today? That's $400 probably, times about $400 to $600 a square foot. Are we that high in Concord yet?
Yeah.
So that's an additional 200,000. Is that $200,000? I'm so bad.
That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the impact.
And so you're impacting property owners and also developers.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be. I'm just saying I want to get something passed.
We can't talk out of both sides of our mouth. Like, we either want, to your point, like, we either want to have a difference and do what's right, or we want to just let property value speak for itself and sell to the highest bidder.
I don't think that's talking. I think it's the another way to put it, talking out of both sides of our mouths, is balancing different considerations and coming out with a reasonable consensus balance. I think what we've seen.
Have we ever thought about making a distinction, and I guess I don't know if this is already inherent or not, but between floor area ratio for new construction versus non-new construction?
Well, anything that's not new construction is grand. Do you mean if you're doing an addition?
Well, that's the same issue though, because it's height, mass, and whatever. It's, you don't want it to shadow over your neighbors just because it's new, not new construction, it's a renovation.
Add-on. And you might drive some weird, like in California, if you've ever seen, they knock down 3 walls and leave the 4th one standing, and you could
Or
imagine
tear the
all
whole
sorts
thing
of
down
weird-
except the chimney.
Yeah.
Yeah, before.
Well, yeah.
I mean, I think that Haley, you're raising a good point. Is what's our goal? And I think we've had a couple of years to see the impact of the existing FAR bylaw, and the feedback we've got from Andrew's analysis is that it has had very little real world impact, which is probably as designed, because you start out with it being a minimal impact, and then you take a step or two further and see where it starts to actually have an impact. So consensus wise, I want to get people's thoughts on what Nathan said. Proposing a line that is somewhat more effective at preventing mansionization than we have today. And then that is where you get with incentives. And we go somewhat further down, ratchet it down somewhat further as the baseline by right. The alternative, I guess, would be that today's FAR is where you get with incentives, and we talk about a lower number as a baseline without incentives.
I'm definitely interested in both, and I guess one thing we could do is to go the more aggressive route, which is Nate's suggestion, and then see how it's received. Although we know sometimes you don't hear about what everyone thinks until they're sitting at town meeting. Let
me ask procedurally, Kate, on that, Elizabeth. I know there's certain things you can change at town meeting by an amendment, right? If we are proposing something where there's a restriction where the baseline FAR is some slightly lower number than it is today, let me make sure I'm using the right words. Baseline is, let's say, significantly lower than it is today. Baseline plus incentives is somewhat lower than it is today, right? Let's say we go to town meeting and everybody freaks out. They love the green zoning idea, but they freak out about lowering the maximum permissible with incentives amount any lower. Can we could we increase that FAR number because it's a lessening of the restriction at town meeting?
Yes.
Thank you. And alternatively, I mean, we could, so Kate, what we could do is, because we're proposing an increased restriction, we can reduce that restriction at town meeting by amendment. We can't go the other way.
You can start with something that's more restrictive and make it less restrictive. You
Right.
can't go the other direction.
Right. Okay. So I would propose then we go Andrew's route. I mean, I guess excuse me, Nathan's route, because we don't think the FAR is having an impact today. So it's not meeting the mansionization goal. And we don't want to, I think the consensus of the board is we don't want to continue to not meeting the mansionization goal if we're building big greenhouses. I also think that one of the things that's going to come, I mean, when we get to the discussion of what is the green standard, there will be a certain irony in that you build big if it's green. And I think that what we will in fact see is that part of people building more green will be driving them to build smaller, depending on what the standard is. I mean, we could have a simple standard like, no fossil fuels, and it doesn't matter the size. But if it's a standard like needs to meet a particular level of energy efficiency, then it's going, by design, it's going to need to be small anyway.
I think one thing that's worth noting is that it's not that it's not working, is that we've set thresholds that are reasonably easy to meet given market conditions, and we should probably assess, if it's easy to write down that these thresholds for size are addressing mansionization, or at least starting to. And now that we've seen it work in a couple of years, it's not that it's not working, it's that we need to go smaller because we've clearly not quite cut enough of the hair off. That's the
scale doesn't work.
The scale, yeah, it's not having the desired effect of regulating the scale the way we intended, or it was intended.
I want to also remind people, especially Andrew, you weren't on the board at this time, and Linda, I'm not sure if you were either, but we did have a meeting with the ZBA about this, but they also mentioned that what they see more often is than people asking for, sorry, I don't know if it's a variance or something for the FAR, which they don't see very much, is the additions more than 50%. And that I think attributes to these larger homes as well. It it typically isn't the tear down, right? It would just be the addition. So there's kind of two things that they were seeing. And so that both contribute to mansionization. And the FAR would only address, this part. But I think at a minimum, we should be trying to, reduce that.
Well,
How I understand
so to clarify, Kristen, it's it is for tear downs or large additions. If you're on if your structure is non-conforming or your lot's non-conforming, and you want to tear down a building and increase the size by more than 50%, or do an addition that's more than 50%, you need a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. What they are finding is that people, they're applying for those special permits, they're going well over 50%, 100 and 200%. And none of them are hitting the floor area ratio. So that right there says that, as Andrew said, the floor area ratio isn't low enough to make any difference.
Right.
Because these large homes are still, they're still being built, especially in the resident C zone districts.
So I think that what we need to do is we need to crunch some numbers. And I think it would be really helpful to know numbers, especially by district, because it could be that this is having the impact is being felt on the 5,000 square foot lots, but there's no impact on the 80,000 square foot lots, but people are less concerned about mansionization on 80,000 square feet because for whatever reason, I'd love to just see how this is playing out in terms of numbers so that we can suggest a different ratio or different multiplier and come up with these two thresholds. And I think it's time to, Nathan, I really like your idea of your incentive number is somewhat lower than the baseline is today, and the baseline significantly lower. Does anybody, Andrew, I feel like you've already got these numbers on your computer there.
I don't. I'm reasonable at Excel, so I figured out a way to make it manual, that it was doable in the sense of setting criteria. There is a way to pre-populate it, but I don't know how to program Excel that well. But effectively, the majority of there's, what was it? I think that we said that there were 129 properties in the data set I was given. 40 of them are in the 20,000 square foot, the 10 to 20,000 square foot. 47 are in the 20 to 40,000 square feet. So that area represents somewhere in the range of, 3/4 of what we're talking about here. That it's those numbers, which right now have FAR limits that are 4,800 square feet, 7,600 square feet. These are big houses that you could potentially build. The most ripe, I would think, is the 20,000 square foot zoning. I don't know which zone that is. I haven't gotten zone type measured as well. But
Residence B.
Residence B. So Residence B is probably your best bet for what to focus in on where you think a reasonable limit is, and redefining that.
Elizabeth, I mean, haven't we always focused on residency though? I mean, that's where all the tear downs are happening typically.
C and B, definitely.
And Haley, I'm sorry, C is which size lot?
10,000, right?
10,000.
10,000.
And then we see a lot of those non-conforming lots that are even smaller than that, probably.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
we've got 5 tear downs in a row right now. And I assume, Elizabeth, those on Conant Street that all came down are all still residency. Probably non-conforming.
Yes, yeah. Two that are coming down are being rebuilt as duplexes. And then one that came down, it's actually, this would be kind of like your extreme example in residency, 96 Conant Street. The lot's only, what, 6,976 square feet. So the maximum floor area ratio is 2,874 square feet. And just so I can show you.
Kind of large for a 6,000, but
Yeah, it's,
And that doesn't include even
It is.
base, right?
no, it doesn't,
and
or
so
garage or porches.
it's the entire lot. Yeah.
it goes setback to setback to setback. I mean, it's
And what's the total square feet footage on that?
the lot's 6,976 square feet, and the house is at 28. I think the house is at 2872.
That's the max FAR allowed. And just so wait, so they literally built.
They built up to the max.
Yes, yeah. They built up to the max floor area ratio, which is about 28,074. I think they built 2872.
Okay,
And
And
it
probably
used to
will
be
have a
1,100 square feet.
so, okay. I feel like there's a consensus, but we need numbers. And I know that was a great deal of work that Matt came up with and he had his spreadsheet. Does anybody feel like helping come up with what the number should be?
Well,
By looking at-
Kate, you did a bunch of work already. Can we just take your numbers and go
Yeah,
down a
why
little bit
don't
with the reasons?
Yeah, I honestly, I think the foundation is there for the work, so it's not that much more work just to come up with some alternatives. Some alternative proposals for people to see. So I think it's just taking that spreadsheet that we've been looking at and just putting out 3 or 4 more alternatives for people to discuss. So I can do that. It's not a lot of work. I know.
I mean, I personally, just to put my cards out there, like feel very strongly that we should be addressing the 10,000 square foot lots. I mean, for the example that we just looked at, I mean, it's a monstrous house for that size lot, and they probably have a basement on top of it. Like that's where most of the tear downs are going to happen. Everybody's, just licking their lips at the area, those capes around Thoreau Elementary School, right?
Yeah.
Like they cannot wait to tear those down.
Yeah, so, but it's just, when you say address that, I just don't know what that means. So I think we just have to start looking at some specific proposals.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
for that is a question, I guess, is the group comfortable with a house that's that large if it was green?
Yes, well, I am, because I'd rather have that than nothing.
Well, but you'd rather have it be green, but would you rather it not be that large as well? I guess that's the.
Well,
the
if that's an option, yes, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it is. So that's, but I agree with, I agree with what you guys are saying, which is like, let's start thinking about lowering both. But the idea behind keeping it the way it is and trying to get some green building out of it was get these developers to start building green. Then they're going to realize that it's not more expensive and that people want it. And they're going to keep building these greenhouses, and then we can lower it later rather than doing it all at once. That's the idea. I just see so much money in property development in this town that I worry that having an impact on that is not gonna pass. But like, why should I assume that? Like, let's test it, because I hate the tear downs. Like Haley was saying, around Thoreau School, like same thing in Concord Center on Laurel Street. I mean, it's so.
I mean, more than that, I think we go to the long range plan that we're trying to support in terms of, sustainability, diversity of housing stock, and mansionization is discussed in the long range plan. So I think we're all trying to keep that in mind.
I mean, developers are still going to make money. I don't think any of us should be worried about that, you know?
Well,
It might be
Well,
a
they
tad
will, but they
early,
want to make a lot, and so I don't know.
so do
I
I,
don't know.
but
It's not that I feel. It's not that I'm. I mean, I just want to pass. So
yeah.
we're
Well,
going around in
I
circles.
guess I approach it from a sort of a pragmatic position, which is just that I think we should ask for, try to get as much as we can that we think we can, with the ability to pare back from there, as opposed to, starting with less because we think that might pass. Like I'd rather we develop it, have some good arguments, and try to, get past what we think needs to be passed. And like I said, pare it down from there if we need to.
I can't imagine, just quickly, I can't imagine like paring it down at town meeting, even though I think that's an option, but I can imagine coming back the next year. So I'm totally on board.
That was what I was thinking too. I was thinking more about if it didn't pass, address it the following year rather than trying to do it on the floor.
Well, and we also have the benefit of the public hearing prior to town meeting. And if we go to that, which is, I think, actually where we would hear from more interested parties. If we go to that and people have significant concerns, we can devise an amendment prior to town meeting. What I'd like to do, I'm just looking, it's 9:16, and what I'd like to do is have an action item for a future meeting to have some numbers that we could say, if we lowered it to this, it would have impacted X number of projects over the last since the implementation of the FAR, and here's what it would look. I mean, using Elizabeth's example right there, here's how that would impact. It would mean they could have only built a 2,400 square foot house instead of a 2,874 square foot house. Kate, how far, based upon the work you did, how far do you how much more work do you think there is to come up with two numbers?
You mean for the two different residents, for residence C and resident B?
So we've got, isn't the current FAR calculation a percentage of, it's the same multiplier across
Oh,
districts,
I thought it was a gradation.
Is it a gradation?
It's gradation.
Oh, okay. Well, so then I guess we need two pairs of numbers for each district.
Did you hear you said how far? Because it's funny.
Yeah.
Sorry. Not a lot of work. No, I can do it. It's not, and like for the next meeting, if you guys want.
Okay, that would be very helpful.
Question. Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know if you have this already, but Elizabeth, can you tell me? I don't know. I'm not saying we need to like explicitly use it, but I think it would be interesting to just see like if we had current housing stock or FAR square footage by zone, just to like understand what the average square footage is today. And I mean, you might have to go, I don't know the zones very well. So, even on the West Concord side, like if zone C could be very different from neighborhood to neighborhood, but like, just as far as like trying to think about what is a reasonable lower value, like it would be good to at least know today, like what the average square footage size is by neighborhood or whatever, to like ground ourselves.
So yeah, that information is not.
Sounds like we need an intern.
It's not currently available. What you would have to do is go through each and every property record card and pull out, and that would be incredibly labor intensive.
Okay.
For
There's no way to like adjust like the listing square footage. Like, I don't know if you use any like real estate database and just like pulled a neighborhood and it would list out the square footage listing. That's not necessarily like always even at a uniform measurement. Is that right? Like agents might list the square footage that's includes or doesn't include the basement, for example. Like we don't have a great way of knowing.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't have a way to come up with apples to apples or.
So this isn't zoning specific or whatever, but I did something like that by lot size just to see what the numbers look like. And so for the 10,000 square foot, they run an average FAR of 0.39, which is below the existing max for 2,657 square feet. When you're going 20,000, it's a 2.28 and it's a 3,600 square foot. 40,000 square foot is 0.18 for a 4,200 square foot. And 80,000 is 0.11 for a 5,300 square foot, and 80,000 plus is a 0.04 for 6,000 square feet. So the end
That's
result
just
of all
based
that
on like
is
our data.
77 houses were over 4,000 square feet of the 129. So you're talking.
Right, but that's a skewed sample size, right? Like we're talking about like any and every house in the zone, in a particular zone.
No, these are just the construction ones that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
data that we had. So it's not the existing neighborhood
Yeah.
character. Just
But just like as far as like what's keeping with character, well, I would think like I would want to know what is the average house right now in a particular neighborhood.
Well, I think what we do have in that data set is, I think we had what the square footage was originally. I think in that spreadsheet. It's been a while since I've seen it.
a lot of info. I can't even tell.
Okay. So Kate, you'll come back with a couple of numbers, just a suggestion and maybe a general sense of the level of impact that would have going forward. Can we just spend, I'd like to keep it short because I feel like lately our meetings have been running awfully long in it. The discussion around what the incentive structure would look like in terms of green zoning. We've talked about a few things. I think Kate, I think last time you threw out or suggested, sorry, you suggested a green standard, which I think is a certification. Does anybody want to just briefly chime in terms of what they think is a workable objective criteria that for somebody to meet?
I think there's new things like the home energy score, and I think there's HERS ratings. I think are good measures.
And to get a HERS rating, I know I have a HERS rating on my house, but I don't know how it was obtained. Can you tell us what that process is like and at what stage in the process it's done?
I believe you can do it during the design stage, where the HERS rater can look at the proposed building materials and mechanical systems and say, okay, this house should, have this rating, and then, and then they could test it again once it's actually built. But I think we're looking for it at the design stage.
Yeah, we need it at the design stage if we were to approve a building permit, right? Or for that. What I'm very sensitive to is this should not be something where our building inspector needs to go out and get certification or new learning, or
it's a
really,
third party
yeah,
person who's trained to be a HERS rater and has software that they produce it. I mean, that's my understanding.
they do. And then they do some sort of like blower test or something like that.
Well, I mean, not at the design stage, right? I mean, I
Right.
think literally
Later.
they're just looking at the plans and putting all that into the software, seeing how the home would perform.
Okay. And there can obviously, you can have a bad HERS rating, but you'd be suggesting some HERS rating that was a reach goal.
Right. I think we
yeah.
could look at, what that is, and then the different factors would go into that, right? It would be the insulation and but also I think it could be appliances and energy use as well. It's been a while since I've looked at that.
Okay. And what's your sense of the cost benefit on that? How much does it add to a project to get that? Because I'm just trying to think of something that's easy and objective for people to get that will be worth their time.
Are you saying how much cost to the builder would it be to work with the
Right.
HERS rater and get that?
Right.
I don't know. I have to believe it's of the total building cost. I have to believe it's negligible.
Okay.
But that's a good question. I can probably get a number for you.
I ask because I've just heard anecdotally, like some LEED standards, right, are, like a LEED platinum standard. A lot of people say it's not worth the trouble. There are better things to build to if you really just care about energy efficiency and the like, rather than getting certification for LEED platinum. Right? Maybe that's not, Haley, you're nodding your head. You probably
Yeah,
know
I mean,
much
I've
more about
definitely
this
heard
than I
that as just a complaint that like to get it certified to that in and of itself is costly. Doesn't, you could meet all the same requirements, but not actually like get it LEED certified.
Mhm.
It's just, it is a complaint that it's costly to get it certified in and of itself.
And Kristen, your view, your understanding of HERS, is that, and I'm guessing that it doesn't dictate any particular technology because it's sort of taking into account to come up with this rating, but you could have more insulation and a less efficient heat source, or you could have a really efficient heat source and less insulation, right?
Right. That's why I think it's kind of the overall look. Look at the building envelope as well as the mechanical systems, and then all speculative based on design. And I'm reading just from one site that a HERS rating might cost $1,500 to $3,000. That's not at the design stage. That might be a rating of an existing home by a certified ResNet rater. So can kind of find out about what it would cost at the design stage. But I guess, in my impression is it is a very small part of the overall cost of building.
Right. Okay.
And what builders are doing these days are, is there's you can have a home energy score, and it's very attractive for people to buy something that they know has low operational costs.
Right. And I've separately heard from people who are building higher efficiency homes that have good HERS ratings that it actually only adds maybe 5 to 10% of the cost of construction. And then we get back to based upon what the incentive is. Well, first of all, they may get a higher sales price, but what the incentive is on square footage, if they're getting an additional, 15% of FAR or something like that, they very quickly recover that and then some.
I don't quite remember. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
So for the past few times as the board's been talking about this, I definitely want to re-say what Burton has commented on, that whatever these sustainable incentives are, that it's something that the Building Inspections Division needs to just be able to, this is it, and they can check off a box. It's not something they have the capacity or the knowledge or skill to go any further than being able to look at a plan or look at a certification letter or something and check a box. But the 4 things that have come up, one is the HERS rating, having EV charging in the garage, fossil fuel free, and solar ready. And the only one aspect on the solar ready and why it's not just, let's say it's a builder and have solar already into the project is that goes to the discussion of incentives to the property owner that they get through their taxes when they do the actual solar part. But having all of the mechanisms in place ready to be able to do that. So those are just 4 things that have kind of been talked about these last few times.
Thank you for bringing that us back to those. And I guess of those things, the ones so the EV charge, if we're talking primarily single family housing and the EV charging piece, that makes a lot of sense for a developer to put in. But if you're talking a single family house and the garage is near your electrical box, that's not a huge thing, as opposed to the, and a homeowner is likely to do that on their own. What they're not likely to do is upgrade the overall energy efficiency of the house or replace the primary heating system if it's new.
Especially of a new house.
Right. So I'd be, and also, the solar ready thing is great, but it can sometimes be controversial because of people's concerns about trees being cut down. We've seen that.
But the solar ready aspect is minimal. It's conduit runs from the roof to the electrical panel. So I
Yeah.
mean, like, should they choose not to put in solar, that's fine. But the fact that maybe when they sell the home,
Yeah.
the next owner will, and it's just so much easier, like you're saying, to do something at the time of building.
At the same,
Back to Elizabeth's point, those three things are easy things to just be quickly checked off in the initial build.
that's true. So I guess if we were choosing, what I wouldn't want to say is provide an incentive for running a conduit down to the roof, up to the roof, right? It should, but maybe that is one of the three things that are required, and it's an and, none, or.
Oh, that was my understanding. It wasn't just
Okay.
going to be one out of.
It's like, let them put
seven.
conduit up and call it a
Well,
day.
Well,
Exactly.
when you described the four, and I already forgot what the fourth one is, I was like, wow, what
EV
if
parking.
and I got that one.
EV charging, solar ready,
HERS
no
rating,
fossil fuels.
no
and a
fossil
HERS.
fuels. Yeah, that's so, like, when I heard that, I was like, wow, what if we had all new construction that was like that? I mean, like, it all of a sudden just seems like a really great place to live. Like, we will be reducing pollution in town. We will really be, making a difference. And the electricity that we do get is going to come from the light plant, and it's going to be cleaner electricity. I mean, like, if we could do this, it would really make a big impact. And I think that builders would absolutely have people to sell these homes to. And I think,
Okay.
so I mean, like,
And-
I think
and-
they're really big steps.
And further in the discussion that we've had before, so what we need to come up with, I think for discussion, we need to understand the costs of HERS upfront and for certification and that process, right? Because that really, like, it needs to be checked the box that the plan an architect has certified that it's got a HERS rating of whatever it is, 2.2. I don't know what the numbers are. And then at the end of the day, that they've got the certification that the test was run and that it meets that. So further to our discussion of, you can propose a restriction at town meeting and then take away things. What I could see happening is, if we propose those four things, the HERS rating would be okay, the solar ready would be okay, the EV charging is okay, and people are going to raise concerns about the no fossil fuels, which I think is the biggest, most important piece. But if that was removed at town meeting, that could be done through amendment.
I'm curious why you think that's something that current residents would not want to see, or I should say a majority of
Lack
current
of
residents
knowledge
would not want
about
to see.
technology options. I can tell you, when I bought my house, I thought I wanted a gas stove. I have an induction and I would never go back to gas, but that's because I
Right,
I learned.
learned, yeah.
But people have this idea that they get those big, commercial kitchen stoves in their house.
And I guess that's why I'm wondering, because the people that are going to show up at town meeting are our current residents, so I guess you're thinking maybe they're current residents who are going to do a remodel. I mean, at all of our meetings we've heard, and I know, granted, it's the same people who come and do public comment, as we're hearing a lot, and there's mothers out front, and there's people who are saying, why aren't we doing more to be fossil fuel free? And I guess I'm hearing less of people saying, oh, we can't do that. But I hear your point. So
I mean, I still say,
could be
again,
totally wrong.
you're asking for it. If it gets voted down for that particular reason, or we adjust it on the floor, it doesn't mean you can't address it again the following year and every year after that if you really wanted to.
And I think
Okay.
the education piece is really important. And we have the sustainability director, and then we have the information officer who is going to help with information about smart growth. And so maybe we need to do kind of education campaign. Well, actually, that's what CSEC does. The Comprehensive Sustainable Energy Committee is doing a lot of, and has been doing a lot of education about for, homeowners.
All right, and you're making a compelling case. I think you're going to get assigned this one for town meeting, Kristen.
Wait a minute, this is all Haley.
Ours is Kate.
Okay, so
This is like hot potato. Can we also, Burton, talk about net zero or passive construction too?
I think we can. I think
Harder.
passive. When you're talking about passive, are you talking about the passive house standard, the German passive spelled the funny way?
That's what I imagine it is when we talk about those standards, and they're wonderful. But I think that would be quite a stretch.
Yeah, and I don't think you could build. I mean, I think passive house by design, you're building a small house. I mean, passive house isn't passive house essentially. I mean,
That's a good question. But I mean, I guess we could kind of leave it on for our brainstorming discussion, and then
It's just
see.
like, it's like next level, right? Like we're going to trying to get people to wrap their heads around, like, all electric, like passive house is just, it's like beyond futuristic, I feel like, for the average person.
Well, it kind of belongs to the old scheme where we were saying, like, if you want to build big, like, you're going to have to go all the way. But I like this net zero or passive, because it's like, it's up to you how to design the house to make it net zero. Like, we're not going to micromanage that. We're not, and like some of these standards, like hers or whatever, which may be the way to go, but it changes over time, like what is considered aggressive. So that's, I kind of like the idea of just having it be like something like net zero, somebody else certifies it, and then it's like, it's up to you to figure out if you're going to do that, construction, like materials, energy systems, like solar, whatever you're going to do, like, it's your business. But but I hear you guys. You guys know more about it in terms of like whether that's feasible, and so I hear your point on that.
well, I mean, so can I just give you an example? But just this is anecdote. But so like my house is identical to my neighbor's house, except for the alignment of the roof, right? So my roof, unfortunately, is not well aligned for solar. So mine would be hard to be net zero. My neighbor's house, which has the same HERS rating, is net zero, right? So, but because of the way my house is aligned based where the sun is, I can't put solar on my roof. But I do meet. I would meet all of these things. Actually, the HERS, I have no fossil fuels. I have. I'm getting EV charging, and I actually do have a conduit for, and my roof is solar ready. It would just doesn't make sense to put solar on it.
So maybe we just do an or, like you have to do A, B, C, D, or you have to be certified. I don't know, or maybe you guys think that's just silly, but
I think anytime we're educating people about the sustainability standards that we should be kind of working towards are important, and giving options for how to meet them is I think a really positive solution.
Can I
I also think for things like solar ready or not, the cost of building that of building in the conduit to the roof is pretty minimal. And, I can't predict the future of what solar technology will be and how to be able to utilize it at not necessarily not the best angles, but maybe 20 years from now, there'll be more efficient panels that can still glean enough energy at a bad angle to work. And you have the conduit already there. I don't know.
So I think Kate, maybe there's room for a net zero consideration. I think passive is aspirational standard that's designed to drive the industry rather than being something that's sort of a practical cost-effective thing that a developer would take advantage of. I mean, I think the certification process for that is probably relatively complex, whereas I think you could get a regular sort of energy consultant to specify whether something's net zero or not, and certainly to do the HERS rating. I think that that's being standard because there's HERS standards in the building code today. Elizabeth, unless I'm mistaken, right? We're just talking about a higher HERS standard. So
Last thing, and then I'll shut up.
Yep.
I mean, there's so much precedent now across the country. Like we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I think, yeah, it'll take some work, but like we can go look at what California is doing, like, and various towns or states across the country.
okay, and do you think we could come up, Haley, do you think you could come up with a HERS number for us that is a good number?
Maybe.
Maybe, okay.
I know Gary put some work into that. I mean, and it might also depend on like, look, whenever we get around to hearing about how we're actually implementing our own climate bill, we're going to be down this path anyways.
Yeah.
I will research HERS raters costs.
I like your basket, Kristen, of these 4 things that Elizabeth has brought us back to as a green standard. I think I mean, Elizabeth, are you in agreement that those are things that would be easy for the building inspector? That sounds like 4 more checkboxes on the form.
I think if, as far as the HERS rating, if it, if the board says, like, a total HERS rating of 50, and when somebody submits a building permit application, they're going to have a certificate from a HERS rater that says the design of this is at 51, or it's net zero. And I don't know what the certification process is for somebody to submit building permit plans and say it's net zero. I'm just not knowledgeable enough about that to say whether that's an easy box for the building inspectors
Right.
to check. And the other 3 EV charging and solar ready, and I think that's a box they can check, but I would have to touch base with them on that.
Could you check? I mean, what I'm assuming is that's you got a 220-volt line that goes to the garage.
I'm gonna send you some guidelines from
Okay.
a Department of Energy project that has like kind of a couple pages, and it has to do with the conduit, but also roof loading and like roof structure and loading, and then some stuff in the electrical panel. So Elizabeth, you can look at that. You can send it to the board, and you can see if you think that's something that we could develop into a short checklist for
Right.
the building inspector.
Thank
But
you,
it wouldn't be
Kristen.
something that I would develop. I'd have to give it to them and have them
Okay.
say
Right.
whether that's a checklist that they can.
Okay. So yeah.
implement.
So see if you can. So get some feedback on that.
Okay. That sounds like an action plan forward. I think where we are right now on FAR is that we want to come back with a 2-step down numbers, a new significantly lower baseline on FAR, an incentive level baseline that's somewhat lower than what we have today. And we're talking about a basket of different factors that are relatively objective and simple to meet, that would together, meeting all 4 would get you to that incentive level. I think that's progress.
That sounds like huge progress to me. I love the Easter basket. I feel slightly like I'm not communicating on the issue of the fossil fuel incentive. When Andrew asked the question about how an incentive works under the zoning provisions, I thought that we expanded that question to council to say, and also for the question of fuels. So when the Attorney General rejected Brookline's ordinance on the fossil fuel prohibition, the rationale was that the fuel hookups are regulated under these other statutes, and if the town is regulating this, they are doing something that's preempted by this other mechanism that we have set up by the state. So I think I guess I just if we, if we have an opportunity, I like the way that we had that discussion, it wasn't clear to me that folks understood that there was a material difference in the way that that's regulated versus the zoning code.
I mean, my understanding was this because they were flat out requiring it or prohibiting fossil fuels,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
not what we're doing.
No,
Yeah.
but the Attorney General's reasoning for saying that that was disallowed under the state regulatory regime would also apply, would also apply to, I mean, could be argued to apply also to an incentive. Like I don't, with the main line of reasoning, I don't see how it would be any different under the incentive. So I just, I guess,
Because it's an incentive. You're not prohibiting somebody from having a gas hookup. A builder can still have a gas hookup. So Brookline's was prohibiting.
no, I
And
understand that, but I think that the difference is someone saying, but you don't get to regulate that. You don't get to have, so I guess.
Kate, I get what the thread you're pulling at, and
Okay.
there are areas like that, like Elizabeth, telecommunications towers and things like that, where it pretty much says, get out of our way. There is a compelling state interest in making this infrastructure as easy as possible. Kate, what I'd like to do is take a look at that decision. I mean, if you
Great, I will send it to
direct
you.
me? All right, that would be great. Okay. All right. It's 9:45. We have once again run 45 minutes longer than I anticipated. I think we made real progress on both of those things tonight. We quickly have some minute. Oh, I'm sorry. Sue Felshen has her hand raised. So Sue, if you could state your name and address for the record, please. And you have the floor.
I will make this quick because it is late. I thank you. This is great progress. I just want to say on Solar Ready, I would like to argue that you should require that the house be oriented toward the sun. Burton, I think you made that point very neatly. That is to say that if it's, got a pitched roof, then whichever direction of the house is most convenient, is closest to south must be the pitch angle direction, so that it can't be more than 90 degrees off from ideal direction.
Okay, that has other implications, but it certainly is a practical thing, as I can attest.
Does, but as you point out, it's not much to run conduit, and I also am in a house that is useless to put solar on. And Nathan, I see your point that things may change, but well, it doesn't seem like it's a heavy lift to ask people to run conduit.
Right.
In terms of rewarding extra far. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Thank you, Sue, for your input as always. Okay. We've got a set of minutes that we might as well knock out. Does anybody have any edits or comments on those minutes that were circulated? I don't have the date in front of me, but there was just one set.
It's October 12th, but I had comments, but they're somewhat extensive.
Okay, if they are somewhat extensive.
I was gonna email them.
Should we?
To Nancy.
Should we maybe hold and email them in and consider them as edited at Nathan's meeting? Nathan will be chairing next time we get together, because
I mean, if you don't mind, it just had to do with the paragraph at kind of the bottom of page 2.
So everybody can just send in their edits individually to Nancy and I, and we'll send out a revised draft for the board to consider at the next meeting.
Perfect.
Okay. I think that leaves, I no longer have the agenda in front of me, but I believe that just leaves staff or liaison updates. Let me just verify. I think that's it, right?
I was just going to mention that Erin Stevens, who's the public information officer, I did contact her after the last meeting to say, hey, can you help us with a public education campaign about smart growth and about some of the concerns that residents have expressed about the Thoreau Business District rezoning. And so she's going to kind of look into some points and look at neighboring towns as well to see if we can, do that.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for that.
Rescheduled to tomorrow evening for anybody interested in that.
The what's that? I missed that.
CSEC.
CSEC. Okay. And I can report that we are now in full swing on the Community Preservation Committee and receiving, doing applicant presentations. And that's why I will be missing the next planning board meeting, because some of the ones I've been assigned to cover are being considered at that meeting. So no deliberations or anything have happened, but one of the more exciting projects that we had a presentation on so far was a potential bridge over the Assabet near the railroad tracks connecting the business area where there's the Marriott and there's the medical building and Welch's to West Concord, and moving that forward, not paying for the bridge, but paying for the design and permitting. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your contributions there. Also, just for people's awareness, I will be at the with the Concord Business Roundtable breakfast. Is that right, Elizabeth? Is that the group?
Concord Business Partnership.
Together with Elizabeth on, I think it's the 3rd of November. And one of the items we'll be talking about is the Thoreau Business District zoning proposal and our Envision 2030 a progress chart, which this group, which is will be interested in. So does anybody else have anything?
On the housing side, I listened in on the Concord Housing Development Corporation and the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust meetings. They highlighted Junction Village. So the project was slowed because there were changes in the requirements for the wastewater treatment system. So it appears, which was reflected in Marcia's comments earlier, that their ability to file for their building permits will come in at about the same time as the census numbers come in. It's not certain who will come first, and so Concord could slip under the 10% limit if they don't have the ability to move forward. Though everything now seems to be back on track, and they were able to get additional financing to cover the change in standards. And then in terms of the other comments, town meeting over the past 3 years has appropriated about $1.5 million for affordable housing. And at this point, about $1,660,000 has been committed. So the Affordable Housing Trust, which doesn't yet have that money in hand, it's still with the town, but they're moving into an more of an operating mode, and there is still some money available for affordable housing, but it's going quick. And then in terms of the Hanscom Area Towns Committee, they are performing some environmental reviews on PFAs in Bedford. I guess those were left from years past where the firefighting foams had included them. They didn't mention any problems in Concord, but I guess that's something to be alert to. In addition, they had a good discussion from MAPC on, they had their expert on bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. And he talked a lot about slow streets and traffic calming and various things to connect up the towns in terms of pathways and hiking paths throughout the town areas. And they do have bike and pedestrian technical assistance programs. And it also turns out that all of the other towns have transportation committees. I guess we're just setting one up in Concord. And they're either their transportation committees or separately, they have bike and pedestrian committees that consider those aspects. So it's something they're paying a lot of attention to. Finally, they did mention as a group that a number of the other towns have seen a lot of construction in the area of biotechnology labs. And I don't think that's something that we've considered in terms of what commercially could be more prevalent in Concord, but it was interesting that they noted that as a trend, and again, something new in terms of planning for what those laboratories could represent in terms of the community. Quick.
Well, Linda, thank you for all you're doing. And you must not get to watch a lot of TV at night.
No, I don't watch TV very much.
Nor do I.
I did have one question, and I apologize if it's already answered. There's going to be a special town meeting in January. Okay,
Yes,
do we know what that's about yet?
Middle school.
middle school.
Oh, thank you. Okay. And then it just said that to hold the date in case planning board had anything on, but we won't have anything about the middle school, right? That's not for us.
No, but it is a special town meeting that gets called and opened. So there could be citizens petitions that
Okay.
require some action by the planning board.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And then, so Burton, my only updates is two updates. FEMA has issued new preliminary maps for review by the town, which make changes up in the floodplain near Virginia Road and that area. When we first got the preliminary maps, we noticed that they completely forgot to turn a floodplain layer on in their preliminary maps. So they completely left out a section. So I just got an email the other day. We hope to have the revised preliminary maps to review in the next few days, but it basically is reducing the overall area of the floodplain based on more detailed studies.
Wow.
So once we have the correct maps, we will be doing just a comparison and then sending letters to those affected property owners, just letting them know that to be aware they are either not in the floodplain any longer, or they may be in the floodplain, but just to make them aware of that. And then the last week, we got the final review and acceptance from the Attorney General for all of the zoning bylaw amendments, except the earth removal. And the Attorney General has, and it's an odd manner. They request a extension to their time frame that it basically says we're requesting the time frame and you're gonna allow the extra time, and so now it's November 20th. So they held that one for additional review, and the expansion of the Main Street Historic District, which added those two new properties. So not sure, they don't give you any information on why they're extending their review period, but it's been extended for those two items.
It's fascinating. Okay.
Oh, and don't forget the effective governance meeting is November 6th at from 9:30 to 11:30, which is
Okay.
by Zoom.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right. I think we're going to wrap up before 10. It's 9:58. Thank you for everybody's engagement and discussion tonight. I thought it was a productive meeting. I did want to comment separately. I think this concern's been raised that the Zoom is just not as effective as it needs to be in terms of getting to consensus onto some of these items and being able to look at things together. We didn't really have much, Elizabeth, discussion around whether we would meet in person or not. I'm thinking, I mean, the numbers in Concord in particular have been going down quite a bit. I think people are getting more used to being indoors. If we do a mass meeting, I think we're there and there would be benefit for it. We'll decide, shortly in advance of when the actual meeting is, but let's hopefully maybe we can get back to that. I'm not sure about the public forum, but for our next meeting, that would be good to get back to. See you all in person.
So for the November 9th meeting.
That's right, that's Nathan's meeting. Which might be interesting. That might prevent me from being able to jump back and forth. But Yeah, I would think for the November 9th meeting, depending on, I mean, assuming like this meeting would have been great to do it because we didn't have any big projects, not a lot of people coming to the meeting. I guess it depends a little bit on the agenda, but I'd like to make sure we're continuing to look at that with a bias towards meeting in person. Yeah. All right. Thank you all. And I may or may not see you at our next meeting, and otherwise have a great Halloween.
Thank you.
All right.